Here's a little secret. Your parents were full of shit. Now, I don't mean maliciously. They meant well, of course. But if they ever told you your disappointment because you're not rich and famous or solving climate change by age 30, they were working off a script that hasn't been updated since rotary phones. Now, those of you who don't know what rotary phones are, Google is your friend. So the truth is, you're not a disappointment. You're just stuck playing a game that's so rigged, even the house can't figure out the rules anymore. And meanwhile, you're up at 3 a.m., scrolling LinkedIn, staring at Brad from college, who's humble bragging about his new job in synergistic innovation optimization, or whatever the hell that is. And maybe you're thinking, did I miss a memo on how to be an adult? But the reality is probably more something like this. Brad's also lying awake, doom-scrolling WebMD, wondering if his back pain is cancer or just from the way he got up from that chair yesterday. So welcome to the modern human experience. A place where everyone's putting on a show and nobody remembers the plot or how the plot goes anymore. Okay, so let's talk about pressure. And I don't mean the kind that makes diamonds. I mean the kind that makes you have a panic attack while you're trying to choose a brand of peanut butter. Which I know sounds completely trivial and ridiculous, but just stick with me here. So we've built a society where success is defined as superhuman achievement. Your parents wanted you to succeed, their parents wanted them to succeed, except the definition of success keeps getting upgraded like an iPhone you can't afford. And meanwhile, the means to reaching that success just keep getting more and more difficult. So, once upon a time, success meant get a job, build a career, buy a house, get married, have kids, yada yada, right? And now it's build your personal brand, disrupt multiple industries, achieve work-life balance while journaling about your gratitude, actually get enough sleep, and so forth. Okay, so the American Psychological Association says anxiety among young adults has shot up 30% since 2007. And depression among teenagers is up 60%. But hey, let's keep telling kids they can be anything they want. As though anything doesn't now require a Harvard MBA, 3 unpaid internships, and an emotional support animal. Okay, so French sociologist Jean Baudrillard would have been thrilled at this. We're living in his hyper-reality, a place where the illusion of success has become more important than the actual success. And we are actors performing for an audience that's also performing for us And nobody knows what the original script was. It's basically a pyramid scheme, except instead of money, the currency is anxiety. Now, here's where it gets really good. While we're all trying to cosplay as successful adults online, the real economic data reads like a rejected Black Mirror episode for being too bleak. So, since 1979, worker productivity has gone up 70%, but wages only went up 12%, and CEO pay up over 1,000%. So, you're working harder than your parents ever did. You're probably more educated than your grandparents were. And yet you are still checking your bank account before deciding whether you can afford guacamole. Don't worry though. There's an app for that. Actually, there's 17 apps for that, all designed to help you budget your way out of structural inequality, which we're going to talk about in a minute here. And, meanwhile, the top 1% of U.S. citizens owns 40% of the wealth. The bottom half of the country, now wait for it, they own a whopping 2%. But sure, your financial problems are probably because you bought too many lattes or whatever. Dave Ramsey said so, and obviously he's never been wrong about anything. Okay, sarcasm aside. So, economists call this structural inequality. I prefer to call it economic gaslighting. It's like telling someone they're drowning because they're bad at swimming while you're pouring cement into the pool. And, here's the real head trip. Deep down, we all know the game is rigged, but we keep playing anyway because the alternative is admitting the American dream has basically mutated into the American anxiety disorder. All right. So I've mentioned this guy before, the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman called this liquid modernity, meaning all the old structures we relied on have pretty much melted into uncertainty. Well, congrats, Zygmunt, you nailed it. Because we're all dog paddling through a pool of liquid anxiety, trying to build solid lives out of soggy pool noodles. Okay. Enter social media. Humanity's favorite group hallucination. So we've built these platforms where everyone's life looks like a pharmaceutical commercial. Slow motion shots of people running on beaches, laughing over salads, and then we wonder why we all feel like complete shit. Now, Facebook's own internal research found that Instagram increases rates of depression and anxiety, especially for teenage girls. Now, Facebook owns Instagram. And so their official response, basically something along the lines of, have you tried posting more inspirational quotes? And I'm only slightly exaggerating here. The real absurdity is that we're all curating these perfect, online lives so meticulously that we've forgotten what our actual lives look like. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's what's happening. Your Instagram grid might have cinematic lighting worthy of a Marvel movie, but your real Tuesday probably involves crying in front of Excel and then eating Cheerios over the sink at midnight. All right, so the average person spends 2.5 hours a day on social media. That's 912 hours a year. I mean, that's practically a part-time job. Except instead of getting a paycheck, you get to feel like a failure because your beach photos didn't rack up enough likes. So this reminds me of the French thinker Guy Debord, who coined the term society of the spectacle way back in 1967. And he didn't even live long enough to see TikTok. So we are now living in a world where the representation of life has completely overshadowed life itself. Everyone's a brand now. Your grandma's on YouTube, and your cat definitely has a better Instagram engagement rate than most small businesses. We're performing our lives instead of actually living them. And the performance reviews are written by algorithms that don't understand human joy. But they have plenty of opinions about engagement metrics. And so we end up living two lives. There's the curated version, smiley brunches, inspirational career updates, humble brags about productivity hacks, travel bragging, etc. And then there's the real version. Ice cream for breakfast, chronic dread, endless FOMO, and, wondering if you're permanently behind in life. The curated version claims to have unlimited PTO and something like a 10-step skincare routine. But the real version is in debt and has a rash you keep hoping will just go away. Okay. So, studies say 61% of millennials feel lonely, despite being the most connected generation in history. We have more ways to communicate than ever, but somehow we're all speaking entirely different languages. Primarily the language of performance versus the language of actual human experience. It's like we're all wearing masks, but the masks have gotten so realistic, we've forgotten what our own faces look like underneath. Now, Carl Jung, he would have had a field day with all this if he weren't busy spinning in his grave. And, the real mindfuck is we know everyone else is faking it too, but we still believe their performance while doubting our own reality. This is human nature for you. It's kind of like watching a magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, even though we all know there's no rabbit, just collective anxiety wearing bunny ears. But here's the plot twist. There never was a rabbit. just debt, insomnia, and depression in a fur costume. Now, here's the tragedy. We're still playing by the system's rules, even though the system is clearly glitching like a cheap bootleg of the Matrix. And we keep on measuring success through consumption as if the right combination of purchases will somehow fill the soul-shaped hole that modern life drilled into us. You know, consumerism has become our de facto religion. You know, the mall is the cathedral, Amazon Prime is our sacrament, and unboxing videos are basically modern-day sermons. We effectively are worshiping at the altar of stuff, convinced that eventually we'll buy the magic object that finally makes us feel satisfied, maybe even happy. But, you know, the problem with materialism as a life philosophy is like pouring water into a bucket with a big hole in the bottom. Yeah.
An enemy has been slain.
Okay, so Tim Kasser was a well-known psychologist who discovered that people who prioritize materialistic values consistently report lower well-being. They have more anxiety and, not surprisingly, shittier relationships. And meanwhile, the wealth gap keeps stretching like an old pair of underwear. You know, the median home price is up 400% since 1970, but median income has only risen about 25%. So we've got a generation told they could have anything they wanted, living in a world where they can't even afford basic shelter. I see this as class warfare designed or disguised as personal failure. You're not broke because the system extracts wealth upward. You're broke because you didn't perfect your 5 a.m. morning routine. This is basically the narrative now. Thanks, LinkedIn influencers, super helpful. Okay, so David Graeber wrote about bullshit jobs, you know, meaningless work that exists purely to keep us busy, while real essential work goes underpaid or ignored altogether. And it turns out a lot of us are being paid to spin PowerPoint decks while teachers have to launch GoFundMes just to buy school supplies. But hey, at least middle management gets great dental coverage, right? All right, so what is our brilliant solution to feeling disconnected from human beings?
Shut down.
Apparently, at this point in time, AI companions. Because, you know, obviously, if real relationships are difficult, the logical move is to start emotionally bonding with algorithms trained on Reddit comments. And look, I get it. AI, you know, it never forgets your birthday. And it doesn't bail on plans. It won't judge you for crying during Pixar movies or for Googling, "Is my rash fatal?" in the middle of the night. It's kind of like having a best friend who's permanently stuck in polite customer service mode. So The market for AI companionship is projected to hit $9 billion by 2030. That's how lonely we've become. We are willing to pay real money for relationships with something that's made of an algorithm. And, there are perks, obviously. AI has no emotional baggage. It won't leave you for someone with better credit. It doesn't have a racist uncle who ruins family get-togethers. But replacing real human connection with artificial connection, to me, that seems like replacing an ear of corn with Doritos. Well, look, in an effort to view this particular topic with some deeper critical thinking, it's dawning on me that there are a lot of people out there who are already relying on AI companionship in various ways. And, whether we like it or not, our current reality has become so desperate and dysfunctional that people are turning to help from AI. And, I've seen many people supporting this narrative in the comments under one of my own videos. And look, I understand. I've never had the good fortune of having a good therapist. And I know that AI is providing some help in those areas for people. I understand it's debatable on how worthy that help is. Time will tell. Let's admit it. The current state of human relationships is a dumpster fire. And AI relationships, they feel safe and reliable. Though I'd still argue that they ultimately leave you feeling like you're eating a protein bar instead of a home-cooked meal. In any case, this is very much a brave new world with a lot of unknowns right now. But there's no going back. So this segues nicely to the fact that we are smack in the middle of what researchers are calling an epidemic of loneliness. And this is another topic I did a video on not too long ago. Now I've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating here. The U.S. Surgeon General, the same guy who warns us about cigarettes, recently declared loneliness a public health crisis. Apparently, chronic isolation is as bad for you as smoking half a pack of cigarettes a day. So, the takeaway here is that even if you quit smoking, you might still die from loneliness. We're hyper-connected online and utterly alone in real life. We know what people ate for breakfast, but most of us have no idea who to call when we're having a meltdown in the middle of the night. And, we've got hundreds, maybe thousands of followers, but nobody to help us move a couch. So, Robert Putnam wrote Bowling Alone back in 2000. And he was already documenting the collapse of social capital. Declining church attendance, fewer union memberships, families drifting apart, people working in isolation, and so forth. We've been atomizing for decades at this point. But now we've reached what I would call peak individualism. Everyone's, a mini corporation managing their personal brand while quietly losing their minds. So the typical person in the US has fewer than 2 close friends. That's not even enough people to help you move furniture, let alone process the insanity of modern existence. Our mental health stats read like horror fiction. Suicide rates are up 35% since 1999. Anxiety and depression have become so common, they're basically just background noise at this point. And we've normalized mental illness because mental health requires social and economic conditions that don't really exist anymore. It's as if we built a society perfectly engineered to make people miserable. And then we're shocked when people turn out miserable. I'd say it's the civic equivalent of building houses out of matches and wondering why everything keeps catching fire. Okay, so, well, what's the answer? Is there an answer? And that's debatable. But whatever the case, I hate to break it to you, it's not going to fit on a motivational poster. And it definitely can't be solved by downloading yet another app. I think the answer might be as old as humanity itself. Smaller, tighter, more sustainable communities. Not necessarily an end of days extremist prepper way. Although given the state of things, I wouldn't rule out a few canned beans and a water filter and maybe an occasional bunker full of supplies. Okay, so Elinor Ostrom won a Nobel Prize for showing how small groups can manage shared resources without actually screwing each other over. And it turns out, when people know each other and have to look each other in the eye, they're less likely to act like sociopaths. I mean, go figure. Humans evolved in groups of about 150 people. That's Dunbar's number. We're simply not built to care deeply about thousands of strangers. We're built to care deeply about a handful of people we actually see on a regular basis. So maybe the real fix isn't choosing connection over consumption and, community over competition and actual relationships over social media networking. I think it means living somewhere long enough to know your neighbors' names. And it means, sharing meals instead of ordering DoorDash solo while binge watching Netflix series or whatever. And maybe the antidote to modern misery is actually, remembering how to be human. Which I understand is a very challenging situation in these times. Okay, enough philosophizing. Let's talk potential solutions. Because I'm not here to try to bum you out. I'm here to just reveal some reality. That's what I prefer to call this. I prefer that to being seen as a doomer. And I think, I understand why people call me a doomer, because, they watch the first 10 minutes of my videos and that's what it looks like. But anyway, I would say in this situation, the first thing I would suggest, stop performing your life for strangers on the internet. Delete any app that consistently makes you feel like shit. Yes, including LinkedIn. And I deleted mine last year and haven't missed it at all. Number 2, join something local and physical, like a hiking club, a protest movement, a community garden, a pickleball league. I'd recommend doing some volunteering. Anything that puts you in the same room with other humans with, shared interests. And, bonus points if you're doing something helpful or creative. Okay, number 3. Find work that doesn't make you want to hurl yourself into traffic. I know that's a lot easier said than done these days, especially in this, current economic situation that we're in. But I think even small steps towards meaningful work can make a difference. Now, personally, I would recommend self-employment if possible. You'll probably work just as hard, and as always, there's no guarantees, but I think the work will be more meaningful. And, I believe that it's not always about the money. It's about, your personal satisfaction with what you're doing. Okay, number 4. Learn to make or grow something with your own 2 hands, like food, music, furniture, art, etc. I believe creating tangible things helps counteract the abstract hellscape of modern life. Plus, you'll have potentially useful skills when the apocalypse definitively arrives, if it hasn't already. Okay, number 5. Practice being bored. Seriously, just sit quietly for 20 minutes a day without your phone and just get used to being okay with not doing anything. I think, most of our issues these days come from running away from our own thoughts. And I think as hard as it may be, in the end, it's ultimately better to just turn around and try facing them instead. Okay, in closing, look, I'm not pretending any of this is easy. Trying to go against the grain of a system that's designed to keep you exhausted and broke is like swimming upstream through lava. I know from personal experience, and I know a lot of you know as well. But, the alternative is this: an endless cycle of shame and fake performance and quiet desperation. Your parents weren't wrong for wanting more for you. They just didn't realize that more had been redefined by people who profit from keeping you dissatisfied. And real success isn't having some fictitiously perfect life. I think it's having a life that feels worth living, even if it's messy and imperfect and just borderline crazy. The system might be rigged, but we don't have to keep playing by its rules. I think we can try to choose connection over isolation and, reality over performance. And ultimately, I think we can choose enough over more and more and more. And if that makes you a disappointment in somebody else's eyes, well, maybe their expectations were the problem all along. Now, of course, none of these so-called solutions can guarantee anything will change. I see it as an exercise to try to counteract the hopelessness within. It's too easy. I see it as too one-dimensional for me to just slip into nihilism. So, I'm trying to challenge myself by mixing it up with opposing energies. All right, now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to delete a bunch of apps and figure out where and how to grow some chard. Because apparently, that's what mental health looks like for me this year. Thanks for watching.
Destroyed a turret. Rampage. An ally has been slain. Your team has destroyed an inhibitor. An ally has been slain. An enemy has been slain. Killing spree.
Okay, so I used to think I had it all figured out. Not life, obviously. That's still kind of a shit show. But I thought I knew my purpose. I wasn't one of those people drifting around my 20s asking, what the hell am I supposed to do with my life? No. I was certain of my grand purpose on this earth by the ripe old age of 17. And for me, that was becoming a professional musician. That was the plan for my life as a grown-up. So, from the time I was a teenager in the late 80s and later into the 90s, music wasn't just something I loved. It was the reason I existed. It was the thing that was going to save me from a boring life of mediocrity. It was the thing that was going to prove that I wasn't just another nobody. And for a while, that certainly kept me alive. And also relatively insane, as you will see. So I believed I found my calling, or my destiny, I suppose. Basically, the cosmic reason why my molecules got assembled into this particular arrangement of flesh and neurosis. I thought if I poured every drop of my blood and sweat into music, I'd finally arrive. People would know my name. I'd have purpose tattooed across my existence in neon lights. And anyone who ever doubted me would have to eat their words and maybe buy a ticket to my sold-out show. And let's be real. It wasn't just about art. It was about ego. I mean, I was swimming in that. It was about proving that forging my own path hadn't been a colossal mistake. Because I'd chosen the life that they warned you about. You know, the unstable life of true independence. The good luck paying rent life. The life where you're eating ramen noodles and driving cars held together with duct tape and, blind hope. And for a long time, I wore that chaos like a badge of honor. I thought that the suffering was somehow noble. And I thought it meant that I was serious. That I was sacrificing for my, higher purpose. And to be fair, those were much more, let's say, idealistic times. The likes of which we don't see anymore. But here's the thing. Purpose sounds beautiful until it becomes a trap. And eventually, inevitably, mine did. Because, no matter how driven you are, and no matter how certain you feel, you can't outrun this little voice in the back of your head that whispers, "Is this it?" Or the fear that maybe You built your whole identity on something that doesn't even exist. And for me, that voice got louder every year, though it took many years for it to become excruciatingly loud. Because my purpose, this thing that was supposed to save my ass in this one precious, crazy life, was actually quietly killing me instead. I guess what I'm saying is this. I did have a purpose, and I was certain of it. Nonetheless, I was completely, neurotically wrong. Now, don't worry. It gets a little funnier from here. Okay. So let's talk about what happens when you're absolutely convinced of what your purpose is in life. Well, sometimes you become a maniac. And I was so certain that that music, was my path, that I basically volunteered to live like some kind of depraved monk. A monk who was broke, delusional, and often smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke. We hear people say, follow your passion, right? But they don't tell you that it might lead you to play a gig for 3 drunk guys at 1:30 a.m. in a bar that doubles as a strip club on Tuesdays. And if you're lucky, you'll make $50. And they don't tell you that, you'll be hauling amps up icy basement stairs, thinking, this must be what success feels like. No, man, that's just back pain. And, the best part is, you convince yourself that it's, this word again, noble suffering. You romanticize your own misery because you have a cause. So I used to sit in shitty abodes, writing lyrics on scraps of paper, certain that I was on the brink of something big. Any day now, I thought someone was going to discover my idiosyncratic niche of art, and the world would finally make sense. And meanwhile, the only thing getting discovered was that I was broke and depressed as fuck. And here's the real killer here. I tied my entire sense of worth to the idea that I was going to make it. Because I needed to prove that forging my own path wasn't just a cosmic screw-up. And I needed to prove that I wasn't just another loser who refused to get a real job. And the clock was always ticking. Actually, I became obsessed with time at that time of my life. Time became this enemy lurking over my shoulder. I'd think, okay, I'm 22 years old. I should have a record deal by now. All of my musical heroes already found success by this age. Okay, I'm 28. Other people are buying houses. I can barely buy a sandwich. Now I'm 30. This is starting to look pathetic. So I was living in constant fear that time was running out and that if I didn't succeed by some magical deadline, my entire existence would be declared null and void. Like the universe was going to tap me on the shoulder and say, "Sorry, kid, you missed your window. Enjoy ridicule and obscurity." And I imagined some cosmic bouncer standing at the door of success with a clipboard, shaking his head at me because my name wasn't on that list. But the truth is, the only person keeping that list was me. Because under all that drive and passion, there was fear. You know, fear that I was nothing without a successful career in music. Fear that I'd wasted my life. Fear that I was going to die one day and leave behind nothing. As if that even matters. And man, that is a hell of a thing to carry around every day. So you keep chasing the dream harder. You make sacrifices, sleep, money, relationships, any other opportunities that may arise to tempt you with some way out of all this. And you start thinking, if I just push harder, the universe has to reward me, right? Right? And I was thinking, good karma will eventually arrive. As if that's how it works. Like there's some celestial punch card system where you get a free purpose after your 10th meltdown. Well, newsflash. The universe doesn't give a shit about your imaginary punch card. Trust me, I checked. And even on the rare occasions when things did go well, it was never enough, of course. Because, there was a bottomless pit inside. So I'd finish a gig, people would clap, maybe even say nice things. And all I could think was, yeah, but this venue and this crowd is too small. The sound system sucked, and the money was mostly terrible. And ad nauseum. I'd pretty much developed a convoluted relationship with the process. I became my own worst enemy, addicted to self-sabotage, because deep down, I was wallowing in self-loathing. I had issues that were unresolved, shadow work that needed to be done that wouldn't be done for many years later. So throughout all that time, I just couldn't be content. And a lot of it was my own fault. Because I was terrified that if I stopped striving and grinding, I'd have to face the possibility that none of it mattered. And that's the real poison of tying your identity to your purpose. It becomes a trap you build for yourself, a prison basically made of ambition and fear. And all the while, life is happening right in front of you. And you're missing it because you're waiting for some cosmic stamp of approval. As someone once said, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
An enemy has been slain.
And this was my life.
An ally has been slain.
I was constantly thinking about the end goal, the future. I wasn't present. So eventually I started to crack because you can only run from yourself for so long. And I realized something I'd been avoiding for years. That even if I achieved everything I wanted, it still wasn't going to save me from the human condition. And, the one truth none of us can escape, which is our mortality. We all know we're going to die no matter what. And knowing that makes us desperate for meaning and purpose. It informs much of what we do or don't do throughout our lives, whether we are aware of this or not. But the meaning might not be waiting out there in some grand purpose. It might really just be here, right now, as you're watching this, in these tiny moments that we keep ignoring, which is really where life happens.
An ally has been slain.
And as terrifying as it was to admit, letting go of my so-called purpose turned out to be the only thing that made me feel free. So here's what happened after I let go of the whole purpose fantasy. I didn't achieve any kind of enlightenment. And I didn't suddenly become calm or, spiritually centered or start eating kale. I just stopped living like my entire life was a waiting room. And I eventually stopped treating every day like a stepping stone to some future where I'd finally be allowed to feel okay. I started paying attention, not in some poetic, slow motion, I now appreciate the little things kind of way. More like, I've never actually tasted my coffee before because I've been too busy calculating how much of a failure I am by age 34. Realizing how disconnected I was from reality, not in some spiritual sense, but literally from the present moment, from the people in my life, and even from my own breath. Now, I'm not saying I became some enlightened monk. I still have low-key meltdowns about things entirely outside of my control. But I'm not chasing anything and I'm not forcing anything anymore. I stopped needing everything I do to mean something. And paradoxically, that's when it started to mean something. So it turned out once we stopped trying to assign our lives some giant cosmic significance, you get access to a different kind of meaning. Not the billboard version, and not the kind that gets an applause. or a bunch of likes or a book deal, etc. But the quiet kind, the kind you feel when you're just sitting on the floor and drinking tea and not, hating yourself. The kind that shows up when you're talking to a friend and you actually hear what they're saying, because for once you're not mentally rehearsing your next delusional achievement or just waiting for your turn to talk. And I would say the kind that sneaks in when you stop trying to conquer the world and instead you just exist in it with no expectations or aspirations of any kind. All right, so here's something nobody really tells you. You don't need a purpose to be present. And being present might just be the closest thing to peace that we really get in this life. But look, I get it. We're human and we're time-bound as self-aware creatures trying to survive with the knowledge that we're going to die, which is in itself, in my opinion, a form of sanity, a sort of form of controlled insanity that we just bear throughout our lives and find multitudes of ways to cover up somehow, distract ourselves from. There's a great deal of distraction in our lives. So the thing is, in light of this, it's natural that we want a story. And we want the plot to make sense. We want to look back on it all and go, oh, that's why everything sucked for a couple of decades. It was actually leading somewhere. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe some things just sucked for no reason whatsoever. Now, I'm a firm believer that things don't always happen for a reason. And I know that this is a controversial subject. I probably could do a whole video on the topic of, do things happen for a reason or not? But, things may never happen for a reason. That is a possibility. And personally, I think that's okay. I'm fine with that. I mean, do we really need a cosmic justification for everything? So, maybe the point of life is just to live it. As Alan Watts once said, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. It may be the miracle isn't some grand purpose, or any purpose for that matter. Maybe the miracle is just not being completely insane while still being alive and occasionally laughing. And, maybe making someone else feel a little less alone. I mean, that's not a TED Talk, but it's also not a delusion. And after chasing something bigger for a great deal of my life, I'll take honest over impressive any day. Okay, so if you're still watching, here's something to consider. If you're stuck in that loop, the what's my purpose loop, here's my unsolicited advice. Number one, maybe you don't have one. You just don't have a purpose. Not in the Hallmark movie sense, and that's fine. Most animals don't, and they seem fine. All right, number two, focus on presence. Not in a yoga influencer kind of way. I mean, try noticing what the hell you're doing while you're doing it, instead of thinking ahead constantly. You'd be amazed how rare that is, actually. Okay, number three, find small things that feel authentic. A walk, a song, a conversation where neither of you are actually performing something. Number four, stop measuring your life by someone else's scoreboard. Stop comparison. You know, you've heard this, the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. I do believe that to be true. You know, most people are faking it anyway. All right, number five, forgive your younger self. They were doing their best with bad intel. Look, you know, life is inexplicable and weird. You get born, you flail around for several decades, and then you die. Some people get a highlight reel, most don't. But all any of us really have is now. Not 5 minutes from now, not 3 days from now, not 10 years from now. None of those are guaranteed. You know, I heard someone once say, being anywhere other than in this present moment is a form of slavery. That stuck with me. So try not to miss it while you're shackled to the hope that it should mean something. All right, that's all I got today. Go make some toast or stare at a wall for a while. That's what I'm doing after this. Thanks for watching.
Your team has destroyed a turret. An ally has been slain. An ally has been slain. been slain. Defeat.